My name is Spencer Swan. I was diagnosed with stage 3 multiple myeloma in June of 2023. I currently live in Dallas, Texas, where I've lived for the last 20 years, originally from California, but both my wife and I, Anna, have been out here for quite a while. At the start of 2023, I started to notice some issues like uncomfortableness, like around my rib cage and chest area, and it was kind of lingering for a bit. And I actually went to a doctor, which was unusual for me. I would typically only go to doctors for like if I felt sick or if there was something wrong, maybe a physical every couple of years or so. I was pretty bad at it. So I saw a doctor, we had x-rays done. They didn't really see anything that was wrong. But the pain just kind of lingered throughout. And on my 39th birthday in May, on the 16th, we had a party, and I was with a lot of friends. And that week I was just feeling really sick, just kind of up and down a bit. But I thought I was okay enough to go celebrate. But it turns out that I wasn't. And the next morning I was in bed for the entire day, just sweating and had a really bad fever. And I went to the ER the following day after that because I was just shaking uncontrollably. And I learned that I had pneumonia, which I was relieved to hear because I had had it before. So I kind of knew what to expect. But at the same time, the ER doctor was talking to me about my blood work. And he said that, hey, has anyone ever told you you're anemic or that, you have low white blood cell, low red blood cell? And this was news to me, probably for a lack of going and getting annual blood work, like I should have been doing. But I asked him, well, what can I do about that? Like, is there like a diet change that I can do like that will help boost that? And he said, really, what's going to happen? You probably want to go see your primary and see what they say, get the blood work done. And if there's something that they really need to look into, then they'll send you to a hematologist and they'll take it from there. So I did exactly that. When I recovered, I saw my primary. The blood work came back still low white blood cell, low red blood cell. I didn't really feel anything at the time. I was recovering from pneumonia. I still had a little bit of lingering pain in my chest. But my primary referred me to a hematologist, just like the ER doctor said. The hematologist, when I met him, he didn't think anything was wrong. He said, we'll just do some blood work and we'll revisit in 2 weeks. But I got a call about 2 hours later, saying that I needed to go and have a biopsy scheduled. So I did. And finding out just shortly after that, that it was stage 3 multiple myeloma, which, I think for me, it was like melanoma is what I was associating that with. But, I had no idea what multiple myeloma was. I hardly knew what a biopsy was, honestly, like before going into this kind of stuff. So it was quite a shock. For what I felt like at the time, I thought I was pretty healthy overall. So it was hard to digest and take that in. It was really aggressive. I think from the hematologist's perspective, I was young, just turned 39, overall a healthy guy. So they wanted to be pretty aggressive with it. From the diagnosis, from what they said, it was like a 90%, my bone marrow is compromised by 90% of this plasma. In order for me to get this transplant, they wanted to get it down to 0%, which doesn't make any sense. I don't even, it took a while to figure out how that was all going to work. But, in terms of what he said, so we met on the 14th of June, and by the first week of July, I'm in chemo. I'm doing, starting out with, my first cycle of, the intravenous, or like hooked up to an IV, chemo. I'm taking, pills. I'm taking Revlimid. I'm taking dexamethasone. I'm taking numerous things. So it was an aggressive plan for that. We had like a little 2-week break in between starting up on my treatment plan. But even then, there's a lot of additional things that they need to look for. I had to do an ultrasound because they're detecting other potential areas that could be at risk. A PET scan, things like that. But we jumped right in, and he told me it was going to take probably uh, you know 6 cycles or so to get through everything. And at that time, we were our drive to the hematologist where I was getting my treatment was about 40 minutes away, which is it's quite a difficult thing to do while you're also working full time. So we had eventually decided at the end of our first cycle to switch to something closer, which was we were very fortunate to get into where we did at UT Southwestern, and I began my second cycle there, and we kind of realigned on what the plan would be on the go forward at that point. But that was a big, that was a big decision. I remember because I feel so attached to my hematologist, but even then he's telling me, I'm going to pass you off to an oncologist, or, to someone else out here at some point when you're ready. But for us to kind of like break up with him with that, it was a difficult thing. Are we making the right decision? Are we doing this only because it's a shorter drive? Will the quality actually be that better? But, for me, it was just like night and day difference from first cycle to the second through the completion of all my treatment with that switch at UT Southwestern. I just absolutely love the medical team there and everyone that's there to support us. The first cycle was easily the worst one for me. I think within the first 2 weeks, I came down with strep throat. I had just a lot of, I was, not moving around a lot. The dexamethasone, that's the main, I think that was the driving point in a lot of my um, uh, uncomfortableness with the treatments itself is just the way that picks you up and brings you down. So the first cycle it was a tough one. Like we're going in a couple of different times a week, and we're making these long drives. But when I started the second cycle, I did notice a difference there, and I think also at that point I've had more time to like digest all this information. I'm not fighting things as much. I'm, just like, okay, this is kind of this is what we need to do to get better. So, but yeah, I think with the second, third, fourth, it was minimal side effects in terms of, vomiting or anything like that. I never really had any issues with that, like here and there, but, I had a lot of issues sleeping, a lot of nights waking up. If I did sleep, I would wake up just soaked in sweat, and that was a huge issue. Just really tired a lot of times. Like again, going back to the dexamethasone. I mean, it really it's a roller coaster, and when I'm taking that, I'm also getting my treatment, and I'm also like they're giving me Benadryl as well for an allergic, potential allergic reaction. So I've got a crash and a spike happening at the same time. So, there'd be days where I would go for my treatment. Eventually it just, and as it is now, I just have injections in my abdomen. And I would come home and I would try to work. My treatment cycle consisted of like my meds. I took Revlimid, 25 milligrams of Revlimid. That would be like 14 on, 7 off for a 21-day cycle. With the acyclovir, baby aspirin, because all these medications, everything has all like things that can cause harm, and then we need additional medication to help like combat that. So baby aspirin for the clots that Revlimid can produce, and then Velcade for my chemo, daratumumab for my immunotherapy as well. So eventually, like those were pretty consistent. Basically, I think cycles were weekly. Then like would alternate. I want to say around cycle 3 or 4 from instead of like Dara every week, I think I would get it every 2 weeks or so. And then I think my dex pushed like the amount of dex I was taking went down as well because of that. So yeah, all of that leading up to, another biopsy to see how effective everything was, and then see what those new numbers were. The 90%, what is that now? We were told 0% is the goal. Anything under 10% we could work with in order to get a stem cell transplant, but like 0 to 5% is preferred. So so after biopsy and PET scan and everything, it came back down to no signs of myeloma in my bone marrow, which was unbelievable. It was really, really great news. But I think a lot of, I don't know, like something that I think I've coped with a little bit more now, but it still takes some time, is that there's no finish line with this, like that, it's just all continuing on. Even if I hit this point of remission here, I have, I still have additional steps to take. And in order to remain in remission, I still have to be, very consistent and maintenance and things like that. So that was always like a challenge, and just not really, celebrating where we're at, but, at that time I was still concerned about how, remission would be, handled when a relapse is, or how a relapse would be, brought on, like how I would deal with that essentially. And it's better to not think about that personally, and just kind of go with the flow, I guess, and just be more occupied in the present rather than trying to think too far ahead. But yeah, I know for sure when I got the 0%, it was huge news. It meant that we could then go to move forward towards the stem cell transplant, which was the thing that was brought up at the very beginning of this. And I think anyone that hears transplant, especially when I heard it, it's like, this is going to be like some really serious surgery. But like you find out more information about it, it's like, oh, it's not that kind of transplant. It's actually it's way different. So not as cool as what other people might have had, I guess, but good enough for me. Once I was in, once I had 0% myeloma, we essentially we stopped treatment for a couple of weeks, I think, leading up to this, and they start to give you these injections to help boost your stem cells, because you're going to have to start harvesting. They're going to have to harvest your stem cells in order to complete this transplant. So I had I went in and had my first I think it's like 3 days of being hooked up to a machine, and by this time I had a line in my chest, and anything coming in or out of me, it's all handled there, which was pretty cool. It meant no more needles, which was, I guess, a fair trade-off to having something in your chest, like tied into, connected with your old blood flow there. But when I was in for my first day of stem cell collection, they actually, I asked them, because some of the medicines that they give you for that can, they have side effects, and I had like an itchy throat, and I told them about it, and they said, well, that's not one of the side effects. So they did a swab test on me, and they left. And when they came back, they came in like full guard, like, hazmat type stuff. Like, so I had COVID. I didn't know that. So they wouldn't, the collection, they were hoping to get like around 4 million stem cells, I think, on that day. We got a really low number, like, I don't know, maybe up to 2 million or so. And they just said, we're not going to do the other 2 days. We're going to take a break. And we're going to come back in like 2 weeks when you don't have these symptoms anymore. So initially I was supposed to get that transplant in October, but we had to wait. But at that time, it honestly, and I know my wife would say this as well, is probably the best thing that could have happened, because it gave us a couple more weeks to just prepare, and for her to get ready too, because, by all accounts, I was going to be pretty useless once the stem cell transplant happened, where I very much bedridden to a degree or so, but just like, very uneasy, I think. So it gave her more time to get ready, because we were set to do an outpatient excuse me, an outpatient procedure. So I would be home. But she would have to be, very much like aware of like how I'm doing. And then, we have to make sure everything's clean, and we have two cats, and, I can't, the cats can't like come up on like, I'm going to be pretty compromised at this point. So it gave us some time to get things ready, which was great. Fast forward a couple weeks later, we go back in, we get hooked up to the machine again after getting more rounds of these boosters for a second time. So we go through 3 days, I think 2 or 3 days of the stem cell collection. They collected enough. I want to say, I can't remember the totals that for what it is to complete it, but they got enough to where they can do one now, and then they can have one on the reserve for later, which, sounds like I'll probably need at some point. Hopefully not, but we so we they have the stem cells. They go off. They freeze and they're held somewhere. And then I come back into the hospital, and then that's where I get my really large dose of chemo. And this was way different than the chemo I was getting prior to. I mean, when I was, I think at the start of this, if you look at like my picture, I have a big beard. I have long hair. So I knew that they told me I was going to lose my hair because of this, or it's very likely. So, as like things are going on leading up to it, we shaved my beard. Let's just get used to that. And then, we shaved my head as well. Cause I just, I wanted to lose it on my own terms and not, go through just seeing it fall out. So we do the chemo, huge dose. Now that they've given me the chemo a couple of days ago, everything's basically, died off inside of my body, whether that's good or bad. And then they pump the stem cells back into me. So I'm just hooked up, and I just sit there, and, they've got a lot of things, just machines going, and that's it. I think I dozed off a little bit through it, but it was a really special day. I mean, we had so many people, so many staff, nurses come in, congratulate us. It's my new birthday. At that point, we were doing outpatient. So, I was at home for maybe a day or two. For each day, like every morning at 7 a.m., I would be at the hospital, to get, checked. And then by like 11 or so, they'd say, okay, there's no issue here. We'll send you home. And then that's when my wife's on, caregiver duties again. I don't even know if I lasted 24 hours outside of the hospital before going back and then finishing off, because I have to wait. Everything is in grafting. Those stem cells take time to get to your bone marrow. Then they have to take hold, and then hopefully then everything starts producing as normal. So they wanted to see it hit a certain percentage before, I would be okay. But I think I got off pretty light, to be honest, because everything that they tell you that could happen in the, during the stem cell transplant, that like 15 to 16 day window, I didn't experience a lot of the things that they brought up. The nausea, vomiting, any kind of like stomach pains or issues like that. It was primarily, for me, it was just, lack of energy, lack of appetite, just really tired. So I do feel I was pretty fortunate in that it wasn't as bad as, what they did tell me, or what I was expecting, at least. So, yeah. But again, like the treatment, it doesn't mean it was easy. It was not, would not go through it again if I had to. I will have to at some point, but not looking forward to it again. That's for sure. But we'll see. So maintenance for me, because I'm high risk myeloma, I go every 2 weeks, and I get, Velcade, so chemo, and then I take, Revlimid 21 on, 7 off, at a lower dose at 10 milligrams, along with my acyclovir, along with my baby aspirin. But I do have to be every other Tuesday. I call it my pudding day, because they have, all you can eat pudding at the spot. So, I always get, chocolate pudding. So that's what I'm excited about. So it is what it is. Like, I'm okay. Like for me, I think at the start of this year, so like transplants like November 17th. I'm recovering towards the end of the year. I'm starting to feel, or towards the end of, 23, I'm starting to feel a little bit better. And what I'm beginning to do more is just try to be a little more physically active. At the start of the year, my wife and I would walk a lot, and it wasn't that far when I was, starting to walk. It was maybe just a little, like, couple of blocks or so before I get a little bit winded. But, over time, we'd go a little bit further. And then eventually I wanted to walk so much that she said, okay, you can just go walk by yourself now because I'm tired of like always having to come with you. So I was like, if you feel okay about that, then I'm going to do it. So I started walking. So like end of January, February, March, April, I'm walking nonstop. I did like 50 miles in a week, just up and down a trail that's nearby, and it was huge for me. It just gave me time to like reflect and just kind of be with my thoughts and think about really the journey. And here we are now. And when I got tired of walking, I started running, and now I'm a very annoying runner where it's like constantly just stuff I'm thinking about. And I signed up for a marathon at the end of the year in Dallas. I've never been a runner before, but I've been running nonstop for like the last 3 months, and it's just been something to keep me motivated. And what my doctors told me is like, hey, when you need something else done, your body, you need to be ready for it. You need to be healthy. And so, fitness, my diet, things like that have been a huge, huge emphasis for myself this year. But also, a lot of what I wanted to do last year was erased by having to go through treatment and being in an immune compromised space. So after my 100-day mark, past the transplant, which is around the end of February, that's when like restrictions kind of get lifted and I can start to go see people again. So, being able to travel, being able to spend time with my nephews, my parents, my sister, my friends, my just anybody that I missed the opportunity to spend time with last year. But not that it was, people sent me cards, they gave me messages, phone calls, so much of that. But having the actual physical interaction again was like what I was most looking forward to. Just living that new normal life that I really didn't want to live before, but now I know. I mean, normal doesn't, stay the same. Everything changes, and I'm just going to keep, working and doing whatever I can to maintain happiness and healthiness. So it's been my priority for the year for sure. I'm very young, right? I'm in a myeloma support group. It's actually like a really big support group here in Dallas, and they've got great, good gathering of people. We meet every Saturday, and I stand out by quite a bit. Um, but I will say, it's taught me like, I mean, I knew that I should be more, like I can't think of things that I should have done before. Like nothing that I would have done before would make this any different at all. But, it certainly opens my eyes to just everything happening. And, a big reason of why I wanted to reach out, not only because my patient story helped me so much, and just hearing these stories, is also because I noticed there that I could be, an advocate for people who are my age or younger, and see that and a voice for that. And, if this is helping anyone, then I'm really happy about that, because, these videos help me and a lot. And so just knowing, I guess, where I'm at right now, yeah, it is a young age. There's still a lot more time to go. And, I love being in the myeloma support group. I just got my first star. So my star indicates my 1 year since diagnosis. But there's people with like 20 stars on their name tag in this group. So it's, it's great to see. Someone actually joked about it the other meeting and said, the problem with myeloma now is that none of us are dying, but we all need so much medication and attention. So it just keeps growing and growing. Something that was told to me was that, I don't know what you're going through, even if we do have cancer, right? Like everyone responds to this differently. You have a different type. We all take different medication, but, I can't say there is some type of hope. You just have to find it.